Good morning, kids. Today we're going to do something that we haven't done this year, so I think you'll catch on real fast, catch on to it real fast. And this is what we're talking about. 5.NBT.4. I can use place value knowledge to round decimals to any place. To round decimals. What does that mean, rounding? Rounding. Let me give you an example of what rounding is. Rounding is what you do if you want sort of an estimate, but not necessarily an exact number. If I had a pocket full of pennies, and let's say I don't know exactly how much is in there, but I'm going to give you that knowledge. Let's say you know there are 89 pennies in my pocket, and I think it's somewhere around in there, but I'm not sure. And somebody came up and asked me, Mr. Tyler, it sounds like you have a lot of money in your pocket. And I say, yeah, I've got a bunch of pennies in my pocket. And they'll say, well, Mr. Tyler, about how much money do you have in your pocket? About how many pennies? Well, the last thing I would need to do is take all those pennies out and dump them on the table and count. 1, 2, 3. I don't have to do that. They didn't ask me for the exact amount. They use that word about. About how much? Roughly how much? Not exactly how much. So if I knew I had quite a few and I knew about what 100 pennies felt like, I would probably say I have about 100 pennies. Now, that doesn't mean I have exactly 100 pennies. Now, when I took them out, if I would take them out, I would count this 87. But you know what? 87 is pretty close to 100. So when they asked me about how much, 87 is about 100. Now, if I had 87 in my pocket and I said, well, I think, now that you asked me, I think I have 12. That is not a very good way of rounding. 12? No, that's not even close to 87. Okay, and I would probably know the difference between 100 or 87 and 12 and be able to feel that in my pocket. That's a huge difference. So rounding is when you're trying to find out about how much of something you have or want, but you don't have to know exactly to the exact digit what you have. Example, this money right here, if I have that much money in my pocket, I have 32 cents. And somebody asked me, even if I knew how much I had in my pocket, exactly 32 cents, I knew that. And somebody walked up and said, Mr. Carter, about how much money do you have in your pocket? I could just say, what? I could say about 30 cents. Because 32 cents exactly is about 30 cents. It's only 2 off. If I had this much money, and somebody, and once again, I knew it. I knew exactly how much I had at 48 cents. And somebody walked up, Mr. Coward, about how much money do you have in your pocket right now? I could say, without any fault, I could say I have about 50 cents. Isn't that true? About 50 cents? Now, let's look at these examples real quickly. Because for the first one, I said about 30 cents. And the second one, I said about 50 cents. Do you see a little bit of difference between these two? Because on this one, the digit in the 10th place stayed the same. The only thing that changed is what's behind there. That changed. But look at the example on the bottom. What changed, one of the parts that changed, was the 10th place changed this time. And of course, this also changed. Oh, so how do you know when to switch digits? In what place you need to change your digits from one to another? We're going to go over that right now. Watch carefully, and you're going to get an example of this. Let's just take the same examples we have. And we call this rounding. And if I wanted to round this number to the 10th place, or tenths place, round it to the tenths place. The first thing I would do is put a round circle around the tenths place. Just keep it in mind, if you're rounding to that place, put a round circle on that place. That's the easy way to remember this. This right here is the key, is one of the key digits. The other key digit is always the one next to it on its right. So underline or draw an arrow. I like to draw an arrow to it. This is the boss. The boss is the one you're drawing the arrow to. The boss is going to tell this digit what it can become or if it has to stay the same. Right? If the boss is a big boss, it's 5 or more. That means if this digit is 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, it's a big boss. It's a bossy boss, I guess you could say. And it's going to boss this to become a 4. It's going to say, you need to be larger. If it's a small boss, if it's below 5, if it's 4, 3, 2, 1, or 0, then this boss does not have the power to make this change. It's too weak. The boss is just too weak to boss this one around. It stays the same. So this is 2. So this is a weak boss. So that 3 is going to stay the same. And you know what? The boss always becomes 0 in the end. So once the boss does its thing, his thing, or her thing, they become 0. So this stays the same. The boss didn't change it. And then the boss becomes 0. 30 cents. Look at the example below. We're rounding this to the tenths place again. So we put a round circle around the tenths place. Now you can round to any place. We're just choosing to do it right there, right now. I look back at the balls. What kind of balls do we have? Yes, we have a large bossy balls. It's 8. It only has to be 5 or more to be bossy. This is 8. This is plenty bossy. So 8 is going to walk over and tell that 4, you need to rise up. You need to be different. You need to change. And the 4 is going to jump up 1. If the boss makes it, the digit in front is going to jump up 1. And the 4 becomes a 5. 4 becomes a 5. Because this is 5, the boss is 5 or more than 5. Again, what happens to the boss when he's finished or when she's finished? It becomes a 0. There's your 0. In fact, whatever you're rounding to, whatever you put the round circle around, everything behind it will become zeros. And in fact, if it's behind a decimal point, sometimes you can even erase it. This time we won't. We're dealing with money, so we really need that to look like that. But that's basically what you're doing. Let me give you an example, and I want you to work this. If you have this, let's try this. Sometimes I like to change my mind. I want you to round this to the ones place. Round to the nearest ones place. The ones place. Now think about it for a second and pause. Okay, now that you're back, let's see what you did. See if you did the same thing I did. The first thing, if you're rounding to the ones place, you have to circle or put a round circle around the ones place. So I do this. The arrow always goes to the right, to the next digit to the right, whatever it is. And this time, it's a 7. So a 7 is the boss. Now you tell me, is 7 a big enough boss to make that 3 jump up to a 4? What's it have to be? The boss has to be what to make that a 4? 5 or more. It has to be 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. Is it? Of course it is. Pardon me. So this will become a 4. The boss always becomes 0, right? And then everything else out in front stays the same. So 723 and 7/10 rounded to the ones place is 724 and no tenths. I really don't like the way that sounds. 724 and no tenths. How can I clean that up, make it sound a little bit better? How about that? 724. Yeah, that's how you're normally going to see that. Okay. Now there are times where you will use a decimal zero at the end. Money is one big example. You'll have actually 2 zeros sometimes behind, or other digits behind the decimal point. But for a whole number, that's the best way usually to write that. One more. Try this. See what you can do. Again, I like to change my mind. I'm not sure I like that. I guess I'll go with that. I'll go with that. Okay, this time we're going to round this to the nearest hundred. The nearest hundred. Nearest hundred. In fact, while you're doing that, I'm going to tell you ahead of time, we're going to work this 2 different ways. But you go ahead and work this down. Go ahead and pause. Okay, now that you're back, let's check. First thing, rounding to the hundreds place. I should have put hundreds, but I said nearest hundred, so either one of those is fine. That means I put a round circle. If I'm rounding to the hundreds, I put a round circle around the hundreds. Okay? Right there. The arrow goes back to the balls. Now, is that balls large enough to make that 9 jump up? Is it? No. It has to be 5 or more. 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. It's not. So the 9 stays the same. It doesn't get smaller. It just stays the same. The 9 says, no, balls, I'm just going to do my own thing. I'm going to be myself. You can't change me. You're not big enough to change me. But the balls and everything behind the balls becomes zeros. So you'll write it like this. 9, 9, 0, 0, decimal, 0. And when we read that number, 9,900 and 0 tenths. Still, not a good way to say that. How about 9,900? Yeah, that's better. Let me throw a little monkey wrench into this. What if this were the case? Now, this is one you better be watching closely because this is one you'll need to know. What about this? If it were this number, still, we're going to round to the hundreds place. So still, we're going to circle this. The balls is now changed to a 6. Tell me what you know about 6 being the balls. Yeah, it's big enough to raise that 9. Now you tell me, what does that 9 become? 10? Will that work? Will that work? Not really. You can't put a 10, a 1, and a 0 inside of a single place. You can't have a 10 in the hundreds place. The hundreds place can only have 1 digit. Okay, it doesn't. You can't have 2 digits inside a place. So, what do you do? What do you do? Here's what you need to do. You need to look carefully and read this as a 2-digit number. A 2-digit number. This is 69. 69. If you're going to raise this by 1, what is 69 plus 1? 70. So it's going to be 7062 and 3/10. Except, what did I not do? Exactly. the boss and everyone behind has to become zeros. So this has to change, this has to change, and this has to change. And when I clean that up completely, I have 7,000. 7,000. So if this is a 9, when you increase a 9, don't make it this. 6, 10, 6, 2, because you can't have that in a single place. Look at it again. It's a 2-digit number. When you add 1 to the 9, you're really adding 1 to 69 to make 7. And that's the way you can look at this, and that's the way you can round. And you can round to any digit in the number you've got. So keep that in mind. The 2 things you need to know, rounding what you're rounding to, putting a round circle around what you're rounding to, and know the boss. And how big does the boss have to be to boss this one around? If you keep those 2 things in mind, you're going to be in really good shape on the assignment that's coming up right now. Do your best. You can do it.